This meeting is being recorded.
Perfect. I hope everybody can see my screen and I am audible and everything is all right. Everybody can hear me? Mike, can you hear me?
You're all good.
Okay, perfect. So, hello everyone. Welcome to today's Grassland Conservation Council of BC webinar, Keeping Grasslands Forever. We are so glad you could join us during your lunch hour. My name is Rabea. I'm joining you today from Kamloops as the GCC Outreach Coordinator, and I have Mike Doodles with me, the Executive Director of GCC, who will be co-hosting with me as well. At first, I want to acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional and unceded territory of the Kamloops Secwepemc within the larger Secwepemc Clue. We give thanks for the ongoing care and teachings of the Secwepemc peoples and renew our commitment to reconciliation and respectful relationships within the Indigenous communities. This session today is hosted by the Grassland Conservation Council of BC, a nonprofit organization working to steward, conserve, and restore the unique and threatened grassland ecosystems of the province. Today, we have the privilege of learning from two longtime GCC directors and experienced ranchers, Brian Thomas from Okanagan Falls and Bob Haywood farmer from Savannah. Brian's family ranch, the Thomas Ranch, has been part of the Okanagan landscape for over a century. In 2000, the family made the significant step of selling a large portion to the Nature Trust of BC, ensuring it remains a working cattle ranch and protected landscape for the coming generations. On the other hand, Bob Haywood Farmer, co-owner of the Indian Gardens Ranch in the Thompson-Nicola region, has been ranching for decades and brings a wealth of knowledge on integrating livestock management with grassland conservation, including grazing within Tunkwa Lake Provincial Park since before its establishment in 1996. So over the next hour, we will explore how ranchers and conservationists can work together to protect grasslands while also supporting the people who depend on them. Couple housekeeping. How the conversation will go on is that we will ask questions to the guest speakers and they will try to answer as the best as possible. And then in the end, we'll have a Q&A session. So during the conversation, we'll focus on the dialogue between the guest speakers, but in the end, we will take questions from our audience and Mike Doodles will be helping us with that. To begin, let's set a bit of context. Grasslands make up less than 1% of BC's land base, yet they support an incredible diversity of plants and wildlife as well as important cultural and economic values. So today we will hear firsthand how Bob Haywood Farmer and Brian Thomas have navigated the balance between production and protection on their working landscapes. So my first question to both of my guest speakers will be, why is it important to protect grasslands in BC?
I'll let you start, Bob.
Okay. I got a little scientific in my response on that one. Grasslands are a rich part of the landscape and relatively rare. So we need to look after them. Well managed, they sequester carbon using water and nutrients from the soil, energy from the sun, through the photosynthetic process, taking CO2 from the atmosphere and storing sugars in their biomass. The root mass undergoes continuous regeneration, depositing
we will
material.
We will just try to mute ourselves so that we can hear our guests well.
Should I just wait a minute?
Yeah.
Anyway, they store a lot. The organic material in the roots, as they regenerate, gets deposited into the soil. And this is a continuous process. And the native bunch grasses, common in BC grasslands, are particularly effective at sequestering carbon, having a deep root system and are often associated with mycorrhizal funguses that carry the organic compounds deeper into the soil. Okay, your go now, Brian.
Okay, and taking that a little bit further too, Bob. I was thinking today, of the importance of grasslands and stuff like that. And for holding back water is another. That these grasslands, they store a pile of water, not alone only nitrogen, but they hold back water that if these grasslands are lost into a subdivision, I mean, how much water does a paved parking lot hold back? It all runs off, and so these grasslands do save a lot of water, keep a lot of water on the land, and not just running off into a stream or a drain and lost down the river. I live in the South Okanagan here, and this morning we flew up to our dam to make sure it was shut off with the helicopter. And anything above 5,000 feet was lots of water. Below 5,000 feet, there's nothing. And like flying over the South Okanagan here, it's amazing how much grassland has been taken up by not only agriculture, but subdivisions are getting higher up the mountains. Our grasslands down here in the south are a little different than Bob's grasslands. A lot of our grassland, I mean, it's steeper than a cow's face, it's saying it goes, I guess. So, there is different types of grassland. Ours is fairly steep, and Bob's is gentle and rolling. So, but there's thousands of birds and small mammals that live on these grasslands, and I think sometimes we take grasslands for granted. I think they're not a land bank for a municipality. They're for everybody to enjoy.
Thanks to both Bob and Brian for your valuable insight into our first question. So my second question will be, what's the importance of grasslands to your ranching operation?
Okay, our cattle depend on the low elevation grasslands for early spring and late fall and even winter grazing, because we graze in two sort of grassland areas, and one of the areas is on the lower Thompson Valley between Wallachine and Ashcroft, and that's where we do a lot. We actually do a lot of winter grazing in that area. So it's really important to our ranch. So the cows that run over there only get fed for a month and a half, and the rest of the year they're grazing. Now, in late summer, the grasses that grow in timbered areas lose their nutritional value. But the bunch grasses that grow naturally in the grasslands retain sufficient nutritional value for late summer and fall grazing. So that's why we're able to run a lot of our cattle year round or almost year round out on range. They're only, like I say, they're only fed for maybe a couple of months, and then the rest of the time they're out on grass. But a lot of it is in the grasslands. A lot of it is grass that grew the previous year, and the grass goes dormant, but it retains its nutritional value, and so that's really important for our ranch. And we always try and turn out before we calve out onto grassland, and the cows that calve out on grasslands do so more successfully than if they were penned up on a feed ground or something. The cows always mother up with their calves, and they just seem to get it all figured out on whose calf is who, and you don't have the problems you have when cows are kept in a confined area. So
yeah.
Anyway, you carry on from there, Brian.
Ours is sort of the same as Bob's. We rely on the grasslands for our early spring grazing and for our fall grazing. But ours, we have a bit of a balancing act in the springtime. because we don't have a heck of a lot of spring grazing. So we have to kind of take in mind what is happening further up onto our range, getting into the higher country. Sometimes the grass isn't coming quite as fast in the high country, so we have to hold the cattle off the grasslands and feed them for a bit more at home, because what happens is they get on the grassland and their next pastures and rotations aren't ready yet for the cows to go on to. Sometimes they get held up on those grasslands a little bit too long, and they sometimes we'd have to move them off the grassland and either feed them a bit at home until till the grass is coming further up the hill, so that they don't overgraze the grassland. But our main grasslands that we graze is in the fall, and which is quite a bit easier to keep them so that they don't overgraze it, because a lot of them times the old cows, if the weather turns bad, they want to go home. So it takes a bit more fencing to keep them up there, but they're a little bit more easier to manage, because they don't want to just stay there. The weather's getting a little bit colder and they want to come home. So they're it usually works out pretty good that way for us. But
Thank
it does definitely, it's a lot easier and cheaper to feed your cattle out onto these grasslands. And a lot of the grasslands too are they're most of them are in a rest rotation. Our pastures, 1 year you graze them and the next year you don't, and or sometimes the one pasture, for some reason the grass grew better, so you can manage them a little bit as you go along too. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you, Bob and Brian. I know that you both have experiences working with conservancies or parks. So how has working in a conservancy or park impacted your operations? Could you speak a little bit about that?
I'll tell you a little bit about the history of the Tunkwa Park and how it came to be. The Tunkwa Park was set up as a protected area during an LRMP process. And I can't remember what those letters stand for, but it was a process to try and get everybody working together on the landscape. And it was decided in that process to the Tunkwa Lake grasslands are high elevation grasslands, and these pictures you see in front of you are taken on that Tunkwa Lake range. And before the park went in, a lot of that range looked like a tabletop. It was grazed right down to nothing, because the cattle like to camp on the grasslands all summer long, and they were attracted to the water and everything, and it wasn't so good. Now, the Tunkwa Park was set up in the 90s, and we were dismayed when they said it was going to be a park, because we imagined Banff or Jasper, any of those places, and no industrial activities allowed to take place in those parks. And we imagined being kicked out of the Tunkwa Lake grasslands, and we thought our days of ranching were over as a result of that, or would be over, because we depended so much on that Tunkwa Lake range. Now, we managed to talk our way into continuing to graze in the Tunkwa Park, what became a park, but with a much higher level of management. And this required a lot of fencing, which was provided as part of the process. Now, this allowed us to do deferred grazing on the Tunkwa Lake area, only using the grasslands after the grasses had reached maturity. Now, the recovery of the grasslands was remarkable, and our calf weights increased remarkably at the same time. Now, one big benefit to having protection in the Tunkwa Lake Park is that the area is left to nature and our cows are kind of part of nature on it. Now, through tree bug infestations and fires, it's been left to nature to deal with those things, and it keeps the tree-centric folks out. That's one big benefit of the park. And there's times when, like, the Tunkwa Park only took in half of the grasslands at the Tunkwa Lake area, and there's times when I wish the park had taken in the entire area, because of the benefits I see in the park and managing to a park standard, I'll put it. And it keeps the tree-centric folks out so that natural recovery can take place after these natural disturbances, like the bug kill on the trees and the fires. And we've had both in a big way at Tunkwa Lake. And in the park, nature's just left to take its course. And you can see the advantages of that. Now, outside of the park, the tree enthusiasts try to create tree plantations in areas that fire and insects have returned to a grassland state. Now, these are natural forces that help support grasslands. And being in a park, that they respect those, leaving it to those natural forces, and that's a big benefit. And we're down in our now we also have a lot of lease lands that are down in grassland areas that are not under protection, and we're having a big fight in those areas where the fires have occurred. We're relatively, now look at this picture in front of you, is sort of open timber, and areas like that burnt in the fires, and the tree people want to come in and turn that into a tree plantation after the fire. And we're having a fight to keep that from happening. We're in a protected area. You've got the protection of the folks just wanting to let nature run its course. And that's what should happen in these fires and everything. They're a natural thing, and there's a place to just let nature run its course. So sorry, I got long-winded on that one, but there you go.
Yeah, no, that's good, Bob. Yeah, working with conservancies and parks, most of our spring range is in the Vaso protected area, which is in the provincial park. And it seems that in that provincial park, we have about 2 or 3 different types of wildlife management area. There's rattlesnake management, there's woodpecker management, there's sagebrush management. So it does get a little confusing because each one is sort of a little bit of a different what they want, how they want it to be managed. So we've taken the kind of the course. The one that's got the most management is sort of the one that we follow, and it's been working fairly well. We've worked with the Nature Trust now since 2000. I guess they took over the ranch here, so we've got a lot of those people too, kind of educated a little bit more than this. All of a sudden, these urban people come out to to look at our range and stuff and say, holy smokes, this has got to be saved. So I kind of say to them, well, we've been saving it here for about 100 years now, so I don't know how much more it has to be saved. Our cows have grazed in here for that many years, and they always come home looking a little bit better than they did the year before. And that's sort of one of the guidelines we use. If your calf crop is down in weight, maybe you've got a problem. Maybe you've got a water problem on your range. Maybe you've got overgrazing a little bit or whatever. So, we can kind of judge the range by the animals and what the wildlife are doing also. We have on our range, we have a big population of California bighorn sheep, and they go through cycles of, sort of a boom and bust cycles of the, the sheep doing really well and then die-offs, and then everybody kind of points a finger at everybody why they're dying off. So it is an act trying to balance your range with all the different users on this range. 20 or 30 years ago, it was us and Weyerhaeuser on the range, and that was it. Now you have us, Weyerhaeuser, and all the recreation people on the range now. So it's not our. A lot of times I get kind of upset with people on the range, and you kind of got to step back, and say this isn't our land. It's everybody's land. So everybody's allowed to be on that land, but they're not allowed to damage it. So, and and working with the conservancy and the parks, there is a little bit more. I can say they do a little bit of policing on urban or recreation stuff, but not a heck of a lot. I think that's one of the things that's going to have to be in the near future. It's just getting so much public pressure for ATVs and stuff on the grasslands that something should be done with that, and then in the not too distant future. Okay.
I know that both of you have touched base on how that benefited the grassland protection in terms of conservancies and parks. However, my next question is a little bit broad aspect on how have grasslands benefited from protection in conservancies and parks? If you could elaborate a little bit from the question before.
I think on the Tunkwa Lake range, the biggest benefit of all has been the ability to get more infrastructure on the ground there. And because we had none before, we had it was just a big wide open area, and my uncle George spent his whole life up there herding cattle to try and keep them off the grasslands in the summer months and stuff. And it was a never-ending battle, and a lot of times the cows would beat him back home when he tried to drive them off of the grasslands. It's sort of a thankless thing, and by having fencing and everything, which we couldn't afford just out of our ranch pocketbook, it really helped us at Tunkwa Lake. Now, so what I want to say is with the infrastructure and good grazing plans, which we were able to have because of the infrastructure, it allowed the bunch grasses to basically come back on that range. They were basically wiped out on that range before, and that now they've come back. Riparian areas associated with the grasslands benefit from the rotational and deferred grazing that's possible now with this infrastructure. And another thing, I don't think it's really the parks people that are doing it. It's been more the recreational side of the Forest Service that have because it's a park there, they've controlled unregulated camping and ATV use on that Tunkwa Lake area, the whole area. And that's been a big benefit. And I don't know that would have happened if it hadn't have been a park. And then the other thing is that's important in these protected areas is that they keep the housing developments and subdivision and all that kind of thing out, because that's probably the biggest threat of all to the grasslands is that the loss of grasslands to subdivision and everything.
What about you, Brian? What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with Bob. Urban encroachment is probably one of the biggest threats we have with the grassland. I mean, you look around where all the grasslands, the nice looking rolling hills, like Kamloops, Cache Creek, areas like that, areas over in the Kootenays, these grasslands are easy to build on. They're easy to put in the subdivision. You don't, it's all usually flat, and it's easy to do, and it's usually right next door to a some sort of a municipality that's already occupying grassland, that they've taken out of grassland and put in houses anyway. So that's probably one of the biggest ones, and recreation vehicles for spreading weeds and stuff like that is a big concern. It doesn't take long for knapweed or something to fall off an ATV or whatever and start growing. It's that's probably the biggest threat, I think.
Thank you, Brian. I do have a video that you have taken, so I can play that now. And would you like to speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, I speak about it later.
Okay.
Perhaps
Yeah.
you play it first.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
So my last questions is, what do you see as the future for grassland protection?
Do you want me to speak to that, Rebecca?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay. I think, the parks and whatnot, it's good that they protect some of these areas. And I think it's important that they, on these protected areas, like that they work with the ranchers rather than taking land base away from the ranches and just putting a hard, fast protection on it. I think it's good that they keep the ranchers involved, because I think we play an important role in the management of those areas, and I think we can continue to do so. Another thing I want to point out, the large ranches play an important role in protecting intact grasslands. Now I'll point out our ranch as an example. It extends between me and my cousins and stuff. We have a grassland land base that runs all the way from Tobiano, east to Savannah, all the way to Ashcroft on the south side of the Thompson River. And there isn't a house other than the community of Savannah and Wallachine. There isn't a single house or subdivision hardly in that whole area. And that's because we have these large working ranches, and we protect that area from those kind of things. And I'll put a plug in. Some people are critical of the Douglas Lake operation because it's foreign owned, and it's but you can't criticize them for the management of their grass. They hold a huge tract of grassland at Douglas Lake and the different ranches that they own, and they do a phenomenal job of managing their grasslands. And it just points out that big ranches can, if they're well managed, can give real big protection to a lot of grassland. But the parks also have their place. So anyway, that's one thing I'll have to say about it. I think one thing that needs to happen, like invasive species are becoming more and more a problem on grassland.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Bob. A lot of people kind of don't like Douglas Lake and a lot of these bigger ranches, but boy, oh boy, they protect a pile of grassland. That's their livelihood, is that grass. And that you think of grass on a grassland, that stuff grows every year. It's not like a forestry outfit where you cut a tree down and wait for 100 years to cut it down again. That grass grows every year. So these bigger ranches, not only like bigger family ranches too, like your family ranch, frolics and quite a few like that. With these big grasslands, it's a huge investment. Is investing in these grasslands. Where I live where we ranch in the South Okanagan here, we ranch on. It's about 2,000 acres, and in that 2,000 acres in the South Okanagan here, there's one house on it. You'd be hard pressed to find another 2,000 acres in the South Okanagan with one house on it that wasn't a ranch. So ranchers, we definitely look after a lot of grassland in this province. A lot of that 5% or 1% of the province that's grassland. Saving the grassland that we have too. I mean, they don't make any more grassland. It's what we have. We have to protect what we have left. Is what we have left. It's it's pretty. I guess you can take an old field and put it into native grass, but it's not a native grassland. It's still a cultivated grassland to me. And like I said before, like a lot of these communities are treating these grasslands like a land bank. They want to expand their boundaries. That's the first place to look at is a chunk of grassland that's right next to them. So, it's something that we have to protect. It's we're not getting any more of it.
Thank you, Brian and Bob, for answering our last questions. Now I think I can play the video, and would you like to speak a bit about it?
Sure.
Okay, perfect. Amazing.
Yeah,
Yes.
I know. Every time I look at those videos, I figured, holy smokes, where is that? I kind of, you take advantage of, you take it for granted. But a lot of those pictures were in the Vasa protected area. That's sort of what our grassland looks like. It's not level. If you go out there on the horse sometimes, and it's happened to me a few times. You're riding across the side hills on a horse, and you look down, and holy smokes, man, you get vertigo. And I've had to get off the horse a few times just because I was afraid of falling off on the wrong side. But and that land, our range and our private land is all connected. So it's connected for our cattle to we open the gate and let them out in the springtime, open the gate and let them back in the fall. It's also connected for the wildlife. You saw all the sheep and that in our fields. So that is connected for the wildlife. There's no where we live, there's vineyards, and they got wildlife fencing all over the place. But like on the ranch, they the sheep and the elk and the deer have kind of free range, so they're connected with the crown land also. And I think that's that's very important too. The cattle aren't the only ones that are out there. It's just the cattle are out there for a managed period of time, and the wildlife are there, for the 12 months. So we kind of all got to get along. And sometimes it's not very easy to get along with, as you can see, all those sheep were having a field day on our hay fields there. But the sheep are there before us, and we've learned how to work around them. So having these big places connected, like Haywood Farmers, the Indian Gardens, Douglas Lake, and all of the ranches up and down the Fraser River, having those lands connected, I think, is a big deal. You look at some places where there's subdivisions all over the place. That's not really connected to me. And the wildlife are kind of tried to keep out. Everybody's putting in wildlife fences. Well, the wildlife were there before they put the fences up. So it's sort of it's a hard thing to manage, the wildlife and the cattle all at the same time, and make everything work and make us ranchers look good.
Thank you so much, Bob and Brian, for sharing your stories and experiences. I think we have good time for questions for like 10 minutes or so. So we'll now open the floor to questions from our audience. Please type your questions into the chat box, or you can also unmute yourself if you want to ask questions to one of our particular guests. We can read your questions from the chat box loud for the speakers to respond. Any questions?
Well, it's a quiet crowd so far here. With you because so for those of you, Dave's got his hand
I
up
can
here.
see, yes.
Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And I'm just curious, is spring's coming on pretty quick here, and we're going to be seeing a flush of poisonous plants coming out in lots of areas. And I'm just curious, Bob and Brian, as to what kind of poisonous plants you're looking for in the spring and this year. And often, when we get these mild winters and so forth like that, and drier springs, we see a lot of different poisonous plants rearing their head, like maybe larkspur might be an issue this year here. Anyway, your thoughts on that, you guys? How you guys deal with it?
We like in our range, depending on how dry it is, we usually get a bunch of water hemlock. Is really the only thing we have to deal with right now or lately is the water hemlock.
We sometimes have trouble with larkspur, but it's pretty spotty. Like it's not a big problem for us. One plant that used to cause us no end of trouble on the Tunkwa Lake Range was timber milk vetch, and it can be a horrible thing if you get a lot of cows with it. But the thing that's made the big difference at Tunkwa Lake is the better management up there. And to be honest with you, there's still lots of timber milk vetch out in the timber there, but we don't ever seem to have any trouble with it anymore. But back in the old days, the openings were eaten right off, right down to nothing, and then the cows would go out in the bush looking for, they're hungry for protein because they got their calves, they're milking and feeding their calves. And they're looking for protein, and they'll eat that timber milk vetch because it stays green right through most of the summer. And we used to have a terrible time with it, but now with the range being well managed, so that there's lots of growth on the grass out in the openings and everything, we just don't seem to ever have trouble with it anymore. So that's about the only thing. and we don't have much trouble. And larkspur, we don't often have trouble. Sometimes we get deformed calves, and I think we used to think it was because of genetics. If you have like line breeding or something where the bull is related to the animals it breeds, but I think what it was lupin. If cattle eat lupin, they'll have a deformed calf the next year, and I think and we have lots of lupin on our range. So I think, but I would say it's a very small problem.
Thanks, guys.
We have a couple questions in the text box. So first question is from Michelle. Which invasive species are you the most concerned about on your ranges?
On our range, it's knapweed. Knapweed. We used to have a real problem with hound's tongue, but we got the little hound's tongue bug that usually takes care of that, and the bug for toadflax. But knapweed and sulfur cinquefoil are probably the two worst on ours, anyway.
And I would ditto that for us. It's knapweed totally. And on the lower grasslands, though, I'll say this: on our lower grasslands, the knapweed seems to kind of just be part of the plant community there, and it doesn't seem to be getting any worse. And I think the bugs that they've developed are helping with it there. But now the knapweed's starting to invade a lot of our range at mid and higher elevations. And it seems to be way worse there. Like our spotted knapweed, even like where our home site is, if you go up the Tunkwa Lake Road, there's knapweed from top to bottom. And we've got, hydro lines and that sort of thing through the area, and they're infested with knapweed. And so there's a huge seed source, and that's our big problem by far. They did a great job on the diffuse knapweed with the bugs there, seemed to really keep it under control. But spotted knapweed seems to be still just a huge problem. We do have Horiolism starting to rear its ugly head in our area, and we're concerned about it, but I wouldn't say it's a major problem yet, but we are concerned about it.
Perfect. We have another question in the chat box from Lindsay Beavers. I love the analogy of the huge tracts of land with no houses on them and what that provides for wildlife habitat in addition to grazing cattle. How can we make that relatable for consumers and their choice to eat beef when experiencing that amount of land can be so abstract and far removed from them?
That's a good question. I know Lindsay, and that's part of her job. Not really her job, but about what she does. But educating the public is probably one of the big things. And I kind of think, like, BC Cattlemen's had a booth at the P&E, and we do it every year. And I was down there last year and I was part of it. And we had a couple of cow-calf pairs there, and I think that was probably the first time a lot of those people down there, especially the kids, had ever seen a cow-calf pair. And I was expecting to get all kinds of wild questions about, what hormones putting into these cattle and antibiotics and everything like that. But the biggest question, there were two big questions actually. Is how do you guys feed your cattle? I said, well, I give them a rundown on how we feed them for a few months of the year, and then they're out on Crown land. And that's the other thing. On Crown land, I had to specify that as ranchers, we pay for the use of that Crown land. And a lot of people didn't know that. They just thought that it was free gratis. We could run our cows out there and, everything was fine. But I had to tell them that, we paid to do it. And the other thing is, this is when beef prices were getting high. No one said a thing about beef prices. All they wanted to know was where they could buy beef local. So, that's, to me, was something that hit home, that these people are looking for some place to get their local beef. And that's, out of I don't know how many people live in Vancouver, 2 million people. If we could get every one of them to eat a pound of beef a day, we'd be loving it.
Perfect. Yeah.
And my response to that would be, we actually put quite a bit of effort into hosting tours and stuff on our ranch. Like, we've had, through the Grasslands Conservation Council, we've hosted tours out on our ranch, and we just try and do. And with Cattlemen's, we've had them. They've brought groups out onto our ranch, and we try and use those opportunities to educate people about what we're doing and everything. And one of the things that we don't restrict hunting on very much of our, like, we manage a huge land base with our grazing leases and everything. And as Brian said, we pay the lion's share for using those. We pay the taxes on those leases the same as somebody would pay if they owned the land. So we pay a lot to use those land, and we don't restrict the use of it to hunting and all that sort of thing. Our ranch is pretty much open to hunters, except we don't like them hunting right in close around our buildings and everything. We don't want yahoos there with guns and stuff walking right near where we live. But on the lion's share of our ranch, we don't even attempt to control it.
Yeah. And another thing too, getting people, the public involved. Years ago, my mom used to host tours all the time for the school kids in Okanagan Falls to come out to the ranch, and during calving season, show them some calves and stuff like that. But that it got to be where you can't take the kids out of the classroom. You have to have. There was all kinds of rules you had to have, so we stopped doing that, which I think that was a bad. That wasn't a good thing, because that was those kids could come out there and they could see what goes on in the ranch, and they weren't just driving by the gate and looking in. They were allowed onto the ranch, and they saw what was going on. So I think we have to get more things like that going. I know with the Cattlemen's, we have our school program to encourage teachers to speak about agriculture. So we have to get the general public and the kids more interested in it than just driving by the gate.
Well, one thing too on that, it's a little bit along that line. One of the things that you've seen a lot of the pictures, like they've been rolling through and a lot of them are taken up at the Tunkwa Lake, and that, on that Tunkwa Lake range, we manage the grazing up there, but we also manage a lot of water up there. And we've got irrigation reservoirs, and Tunkwa Lake is an irrigation reservoir. Like, the ranchers have put a ditch in to feed it out of Gishon Creek, and the public use at Tunkwa Lake is phenomenal, and that's all. It's all a little bit of a give back that the ranchers do for the public.
Mm-hmm.
We're giving them something there by managing that water, and I hope. Anyway, I hope they appreciate it.
All right. From the chat box, I'll take Sarah's question first because I remember she raised her hand. So she asked, what tool do you find is the most effective in controlling cattle distribution in these open pastures? Cattle would be largely attracted to salt, palatable forage, and the water sources. But for discouraging higher intensity use in unfavorable or sensitive areas, what works best for you?
You want to do that one, Brian?
Right now, I guess it's fencing, but fencing is an evil of itself. You build a fence and then you have to maintain it. We've got all our fences on our range pretty near rebuilt now because they all burnt off. But saying that, we have beautiful fences, but you got to go look after them every year. There's a couple of ranchers down here that have started to use virtual fencing with collars. And why they used it was because a bunch of their fences had got burned out during some of the wildfires, and they were pretty good sized fences. One fence was about 15 kilometers long, so they opted to use and try these virtual collars, and they've used them for a couple of years now, and there's still bugs in them to work out. But believe it or not, they're working. I saw them I went down across the line here in to Washington State here a few years ago to look at virtual collars, and I figured that was the goofiest thing I'd ever seen, But it does work. You have to train your cows a little bit. It takes a little bit more work to do it, but you can manage your cattle and keep them out of areas without fencing. It kind of works like a collar that you put on your dog for training your dog. It gives them a little shock when where they're not supposed to be. So, but we'll see. It's still a sort of a tool that I think is being improved on that we may be able to use.
I'll sort of ditto what Brian says. We've never tried the virtual. We do a lot of electric fencing on our ranch, and we've got miles and miles of electric fence, and they're really effective too, and much cheaper to build. I didn't used to believe in them, but now we've learned how to build them properly now and train our animals to respect them, and they work great. One thing I'll point out, one thing that with our rotations, we try and confine, put bigger numbers of cattle into a given area, but we limit the time that they're in that pasture. And by doing that, the cattle eat the forage more uniformly. If you put low numbers in a pasture for a long, long period of time, the thing that the cattle are most attracted to is the regrowth. So they'll go and eat their favorite plants. And then as soon as those plants start to regrow, if they're kept in there a long time, that's the first thing they'll go and eat, is that they'll go and eat that regrowth on the same plants that they grazed before. So having low stocking numbers for a long period of time is a problem on managing range, and having bigger numbers for a short period of time accomplishes an awful lot. And of course you need fencing and that to do that, to break your land down into pastures. And anyway,
So Mike here, I just, before start, people will start leaving at 1 here pretty quick. So I just, before people leave, I do want to give a shout out to our ranchers for joining us here on their time, and a big thanks for their thoughts. For those of you who don't know the Grasslands, I'm executive director of Mike Beatles. We're a broad-based group. Most of BC's grasslands are grazed, so getting the ranchers to talk about their thoughts on grasslands in general and protected areas is important, and that's why we did this today. And then we've got naturalists on our group, and we've got scientists, we've got all sorts of people representing the grasslands, and with a common desire for keeping our grasslands and keeping them healthy. So Brian and Bob have been at it for a while, and I just want to thank them again for joining us today.
My pleasure.
We do have another webinar coming up next week. Can you
I'm just
put that
putting the
one up?
information on chat box so that everybody has that.
Okay. And Heidi will be on there. When it comes to promoting grasslands, we have been teaming up with the National Grasslands Coalition, and we'll be giving another webinar next week with NCC on that. So check out the chat box for the link for that one if you want to join in then. And Rebea will also put up our membership form here in a second. We are a membership organization. We appreciate we've got many members on here today, and thank you for joining us. And if you're not a member, we'd love to have you join. We've got a few different membership options these days.
And thank you guys. I'll thank you guys for the opportunity to talk to people.
Yeah.
And thanks, Rebea, for
Yeah, of
sharing
course.
this.
Thank
And
you for your time.
Thank you.
Of course. All right, so I'll just put the membership. There you go. This is a membership form.
And we did put this one together fairly quickly, so we didn't advertise it. We only had about less than a week to get the word out on it, and so not everybody got to see it who would like to. So we will have it up on our YouTube channel and let people have a look a little later.
And this is the webinar registration link that will be happening next week. So yeah.
It was also posted in our recent newsletter if you get our newsletter. So yeah.
Yep. And also, I just want to put it out there, we are developing a student chapter. So if you have any students who go to TRU, just let them know. We have a Grassland chapter now. We are engaging more students. And we have a wheat pool event coming up next month, April 11th.
And if you're in the Merritt country, Rebea and I are heading down there tonight to Rebea is giving a presentation on her thesis work at Highland Valley Copper on various plants there. Native plants, and so I'm looking forward to seeing that and visiting with some of the Merritt naturalists this evening.
Perfect.